You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of the album Hexed by the artist Aya, A-Y-A, from Huddersfield in the UK, now via London, whose genre is, broadly speaking, what I would loosely term UK-based music, which is a kind of invented terminology for music that came out after the first wave of dubstep in the UK, and then by about 2006, 2007, these very forward-thinking artists from Burial to Zombie to the Hyperdub label to the early James Blake EPs and so on, they all were making post-dubstep, which sounded nothing like each other particularly, and it's sort of like an umbrella term, which I think this falls into more than anything else I can think of, and it's one of the most acclaimed albums of the year. Aya is trans, and that's a very important point in the review of this album. So, reviewing the music, I've never listened to an album where I absolutely hated the first half of the album, and it's 10 tracks long, so it's like literally 5 tracks, and then really kind of like the second half of the album. So it was a really wild ride, and I think the first 5 tracks all inhabit this exactly the same place. So the first one, I Am the Pipe I Hit Myself With, has the trademark of the first half of the album, which is incredibly disagreeable yelping vocals, like a vegan death grips. And the music as well, it's not that interesting. The beats aren't interesting on the first half of the album. It's like this sort of avant-garde UK-based music, but if I'd have heard it in 2012, I would have said it wasn't that interesting compared to the contemporaries. Second one, Off to the Esso. Esso, I'm assuming, being the old school service station that you might go to late at night. Again, extremely aggravating vocals, like 100 Gex if they were angry librarians. The music's all over the place on these tracks. It's just sound collages, a lot of abrasive noise, but it doesn't coalesce into a track. I'm going to quote the title because quoting isn't the same as using a derogatory term. We've lost the ability to understand context in language, and we just take it as literalism. But if you denude a title when an offensive word has been used, you're kind of removing its agency, I feel. So the third title is The Names of Faggot Chav Boys. It's a one-trick pony album at this point. Every track is doing the same thing, and the beatscapes just aren't interesting. So you've got this yelping and squealing and screaming over the top, reminding me a little bit of the vocalist from Dry Cleaning, but angrier, and it's not in any way backed up by the music, which itself is quite pedestrian and ordinary, even though it's scattershot. It's like the vocals are at one wavelength of, apoplexia, and then the instrumentals are just like quite boring in the background. Cumulatively, Heat Death track 4, it's I've written down here like a weak cross between a vocalist from Dry Cleaning and the Sleaford Mods. It's a very white sounding album, interestingly. Like, there's no rhythm, there's no swing or sway in the beats. It's very much antiseptically white, I feel. Sure, that'll go down well. And the beats don't even sound like, that's track 5, Peach, which is an end of 5 tracks that I detested. And then for some reason, and a big part of that is the fact that the yelpy vocals disappear a bit, I found the second half of the album much more agreeable. So the title track, Hexed, it's got this ominous synth build that actually feels like it develops into an actual song. And this Japanese garden sort of plinking in the background of this noise music. And no vocals at all. By far the best track I've heard so far on this album. Track 7, The Droplets. It's got this sort of dub trip dub, whatever softer vocals, which is pleasanter than listening to the rest of the album, and almost a pop song. It's quite appealing. I like the use of the layered vocals in multiple ways, and it builds throughout the course of the song rather than just simply replicating every track that came before it. A decent enough drum pattern, and Navel Gazer, it's got this sort of post-Sophie hyper-pop blast beat thing going on. And it's got the vocals here go back to that kind of apoplexia, but the music actually backs it up by being sort of like big enough to fit the vocal rather than just anonymous. There's a nice sort of ambient breathe with the petard is my hoister. Hoisted on my own petard. One of my favourite phrases of all time, as it universally applies to everything I do. And it really has a flow, this second half of the album. The first is just 5 tracks that are the same building blocks that go absolutely nowhere and are really difficult to listen to. Nice sort of deep thud of footwork for the final track, Time at the Bar. And the screamo vocal works quite well here as well. Almost like a trip-hop version of Deaf Heaven with Crystal Castles thrown into the mix. It's probably the best track on the album. It's almost got that Bowie thing from Low End Heroes, where it's got this sort of hyperkinetic first half and then this much moodier, more synth-based second half. Now, I mentioned the trans thing at the start. I think if you go to somewhere like Pitchfork or Most Modern Critical Appraisal and you start mentioning queer or trans, they give you 2 extra points, because there's nothing on here that is worth the score they gave them. And it really does feel like it's part of, if you're out there as a musician right now, just make up that you're bi or trans or demisexual or something. Otherwise, you just won't get taken seriously. And what you will get if you do say those things is a lot of people try and imbue your average art with a lot more substance than it actually has. I don't care. I don't rate stuff as being good or bad because it was made by someone that was trans. But what I don't do is say music I thought was rubbish is actually great because of it. So yeah, I hated the first half of Aya's Hexed, and I really liked the second half. So I'm going to give Aya's Hexed, one of the most acclaimed albums of the year, a 5 out of 10.